بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الجليل الكريم الممين الأكي الوحيد العزيز الودود الأعلى الولي الوهاب الحق السلام. Ramadan Kareem, everybody. I'm taking a break from working on Sunday, starting to feel the spirit of the season, mashallah. When your glycogens are depleted and you're ready to quit, but you're not just turning yourself over to diversions, but actually trying to rise into the direct experience and succour the lack of succour. And what could be more Zen Islam than that, right? So, inshallah, I'll be doing more of these videos this Ramadan and trying shorter form content and then being able to splice shorts out of it and maybe getting a little more traction on the channel, because I think that the work I'm doing here is important and needs to be. It's not like so important. It's not as important as the work of Mufti Abu Layth, for example. I think he's done important work, but maybe it's as important as maybe it's 30 or 40% as important as the output of a Sufi sheikh. And inshallah, I can increase that percentage in the coming decade. But the perspective I'm putting out is a bit unique. I'm covering some ground that hasn't quite been covered. So inshallah, we'll learn something in bite-sized elements. Today I want to talk about the concept that it was considered foundational to the classical Mutazili of there being a purgatory state in between Iman and Kufr, the state of Fasiq. And Muta means to separate, and so the Mutazili were named for separating from a dialectic, taking a middle path. Some people attribute this to being that they took a middle path between Muawiyah and Ali, alayhi salam. And you might say that the Mutazili straddle sectarian lines. They're both proto-Sunni and they're also light Shia. They're a sister sect to the Twelvers in many respects, and more to the Zaydis. So that the Mutazili are perhaps the lowest imamology form of Shiism, and they're also prime Sunnis. They're ascended Hanafis. The Hanafi madhab that was not to be. Unfortunately, we ended up with the Deobandi Taqlid mutation of it. So modern Neo-Mutazili tend to be more benighted sort of liberals, and they want to firm up on fiqh a little bit more and have a link of tradition and not just be a progressive Muslim per se, even though they may have many progressive positions, such as the Aqidah position that hell is not eternal in the perpetual torment sense, perhaps in the annihilation sense, or in Ibn Arabi sense, which is more, I think, is a stronger position. More tolerant of Muslim women marrying non-Muslim. There's a number of fiqh positions. I'm not gonna. This is fiqh is a little bit below where I'm trying to go with this contemplation. And the meme is that modern Mutazili are kind of coping with their dissatisfaction with the Muslim tradition, but that the classical Mutazili would actually be more intolerant than Maturidi, for example, which is their sort of taqlided Akida hybridization. Um, the Ash'aris, of course, being a strict hybridization. Al-Ash'ar was Mutazili who defected after having a dream in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to him and said, basically, you got to firm up on hadiths. So we got the hybrid of Hanbali and Mutazili. And then Maturidi is, in some sense, a different permutation of it. But indeed, it is something precious that is held between the Zaydis, the Twelvers, and Neo Mutazili, that we have an Akida of pure Tawheed, in which the Sifat and the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are unified. Now, this comes from the heart of the Sunnah, through the Waliya of Imam Ali, through his sermons, and through the teachings in the Nahul Balaga, and what was transmuted through his Hashemite son to Wasil ibn Atta, the founder of the Mutazili school. And in Ibadi, Zaydi, and Twelver fiqh, you'll actually get a little bit more of a sternness. So the Ahl Sunnah, on the contrary to being patriarchy and slavery establishment that is against the Quran, which of course is a part of it, is that there's a mercy in the Sunni Hadith corpus, where you might have the Maturidi concept of, you were a major sinner, maybe you did really terrible things, detonated yourself in a masjid, and it turns out that wasn't right. You obviously thought those deeds would not be wasted. In fact, they were shirk and vulm and fisk to the maximum degree. And the Quran says, whoever kills a believer, there will be no intercession for them. But Maturidi fiqh, maybe, let's say, somehow is correct anyway. And all these other schools, or not Maturidi fiqh, Maturidi Akida, and all these other schools that say no, it's not happening. Their reading of the Quran wasn't taking into account these hadiths. So the hadiths are true, and therefore you were a Muslim. So you were a Fasiq, but you were a Muslim. And then eventually you will be saved. Well, this is a very problematic way to think when you take it to those extremes. But when you take it to the levels of somebody who, Yaki, I'm a Muslim, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah, salawat, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but I like to drink, Habibi. I like to look at the girls, etc., etc. So then, this is a mutation. This is a corner of evolution, a sort of evolutionary dead end of the kind of permissive fiqh that we might see from Islamic modernists or someone like Mufti Abu Layth, who's arguing it funnily enough, you could say a Salafi perspective, because he's arguing from the precedent of the Salaf of the Ahl Madina, Athar Madina. And yet, there's a strictness that comes in that firms up on these things. So when I see people commenting in the Progressive Islam sub, in Quran sub, it's a flow of seekers, and they're trying to firm up on tafsir. They're really trying to learn the Quran, or maybe they're nitpicking on something, some kind of conspiracy theory about maybe things were different from the narrative, which is, I think, fun. I don't think it's really that important. For example, if Mecca is where it is, or if it's in the Bekaa Valley, perhaps the original masjid was in the Bekaa Valley, and then the historical masjid is in the current position of modern day Mecca, and you get credit for the Hajj when you go there. And yeah, the hotels are expensive, but that's more about them misappropriating the fiqh around the 4 sacred months and so on. So, anyways, be that as it may, I don't have the courage to bet my soul on not doing Hajj in the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. Just have to pay up the money at some point, inshallah. So, getting to the core idea, because of the misunderstanding of the verses in Surah Al Imran about the deen in the eyes of Allah is Al Islam, and that this is taken as the edifice of institutional Islam is the actual correct religion. It has an exclusivist claim, which is valid, and the Jews and the Christians say to you, be one of us and you'll be guided, but they're wrong. It's actually Islam. This is basically saying their exclusivist claims are incorrect and their exclusivist claims are incorrect, but our exclusivist claims are correct. So this is the classical Sunni tafsir. And in other schools and in the lay Sunni, or people nowadays are thankfully just identifying as simple Muslims, which is great. This is probably the right thing for people who haven't put in at least 1,000 hours to study. Um, they kind of just read the Quran and they take it at its word, and it seems like a contradiction, but there's an understanding among many Shia and among many Quranists and um, not so much the Ibadis, and I don't think actually very much the formally descended Fiqhi Zaydis. But there is this broadly taken understanding that someone does not have to say Shahada to get into heaven. It's more about what they do and their disposition towards God in a de minimis sense of believing in God and the judgment. And therefore being motivated to hold yourself accountable to that with your deeds. So there's some intent behind the deeds. And then there's this idea that, for instance, Brother Khalid likes to espouse, which I don't quite go that far, about atheists, or maybe not ardent atheists, but agnostics, people who have just an atom's weight of iman. So there's the same hadith, the Ibn Abbas hadith about the intercession. There's room for that, and I think that hadith is important for that Allah will save people from hell for having certain grains of iman. And so now their akida has been corrected by the experience, however brief, um, and overall their deeds were good enough to merit it. So this would be more or less consistent with all but the most hardcore readings of the Quran only. So this is what one can do with many hadiths, such as problematic ones, such as the 3 generations hadith or the 73 sects hadith, is you can reinterpret it in a way where it doesn't mean what it apparently means, and then this leaves you with this question: well, why is seems like bad communication? So the 73 sects would be like, well, the safe sect is the people who aren't that sectarian, so it's a meta sect. It's not like a specific sect that you have to actually pick out. Or the 3 generations may have been limited in scope, and obviously from like a Shia point of view or a Quranist point of view or Mutazili point of view, it's simply not the case. It was filled with, not filled, but it was populated with some very bad munafiqun who did a lot of damage to the deen and its people, including sacking Medina. But it could have been a statistically valid statement that isn't exclusive to all generations, but it could have been descriptive enough at a broad statistical level, and so on. So, anyways, when someone like Mufti Abu Layth critiques the Mutazili as extremists for saying that they believe that if you commit a sin, that you're no longer a Muslim, he's sort of verging on an institutional Zahiri concept of what being a Muslim is. Muslim with a capital M, not Muslim with a lowercase m in the batin. The way that a Unitarian Christian or truthful Trinitarian, perhaps in some interpretations, or an anti-Zionist Jew, or maybe some of these leftist sort of secularish they're motivated. They believe in something. They believe in doing right in the eyes of history. So it's only their concept of akida is limited to the social consensus of morality in the future. But they believe that there's some kind of universal morality. This is what's interesting about Western secularism. It's this very much a post-Christian ideology. So they have grains of iman, and therefore they're Muslim in the batin in some sense. And then if you are not sinning, then you are more Muslim in the batin, irrespective of how Muslim you are in your speech. And of course, the Quran talks about this a lot. And it's actually the scariest position to be in. It's better to be a kafir fighting the Muslims, um, or mushrik or kafir mushrik, what have you, than to be a munafiqun. And then the reason why the Khawarij took a Quran only reading to the extent that they did, making things substantially worse and ultimately earning their eradication. And the reason the Ibadis are so difficult to enjoy, and the reason why there's so many shirk fanaticist Quranists, especially among the young men, to the point that they won't consider marriage with Sunnis and Shias. Now, to be fair, that's also a sentiment held among those sects about people of other sects. But this is denying love, denying the sweetness that Allah has created and the ability to transcend these things. Of course, how we raise children is important. But the more niche your perspective, the more difficult it's going to be to find a perfect family match in these regards. I'm going to have to turn this off. My thing's overheating. Maybe it won't. So there's something actually very beautiful when you understand the Mutazili concept in the right